A Machiavellian perspective on modern geopolitical theater, the cabal behind the curtain. In the world of geopolitics, many analysts fixate on the immediate bombings, regime changes, military skirmishes, offering commentary on the surface-level power struggles. But these views often miss the deeper dynamics, the grand strategy that Niccolò Machiavelli would advise a discerning ruler to observe. As Machiavelli emphasized in The Prince, the actions of leaders often serve a higher purpose, dictated by pragmatism, power retention, and manipulation of the masses. Today's global stage is no different. The wars, conflicts, and terrorist organizations that dominate headlines are often little more than tools wielded by a hidden elite, what some might call a cabal, whose goal is not merely dominance, but the orchestration of perpetual conflict to maintain their control. The role of manufactured enemies. Machiavelli would have readily identified with the notion that today's terrorist organizations and enemies are created, funded, and manipulated to serve larger strategic interests. In The Prince, he advises rulers to always have an enemy, as it solidifies internal control, unifies the populace under a common threat, and provides a justification for exercising power with severity. Modern rulers and elites, whether they be in Russia, the United States, or China, follow this age-old Machiavellian principle. The so-called war on terror, or even the war in Ukraine, provides a perfect example. These conflicts sustain an endless cycle of war, fostering fear and obedience among the populace, while benefiting the elite who profit from military contracts, political power, and social control. Just as Machiavelli understood that wars were less about moral rights than securing one's rule, today's terrorist threats seem engineered. Consider Hezbollah, an organization long touted as a mortal danger to Israel. While analysts might obsess over the potential destruction Hezbollah could bring, Machiavelli would ask, who benefits from Hezbollah's existence? The constant fear of Hezbollah has justified decades of military expansion, political alliances, and Western involvement in Middle Eastern geopolitics. The so-called war is as much about maintaining Israel's strategic dominance and ensuring the business of conflict continues as it is about any existential threat. Similarly, the war in Ukraine, cast as a battle between Western democracy and Russian autocracy, is portrayed through an emotional lens where Zelensky is a heroic defender of freedom. Yet, Machiavelli would advise against seeing Zelensky as an independent actor. Instead, he would argue that both Putin and Zelensky are playing roles assigned to them in a larger geopolitical script, one that is choreographed by those who benefit most from perpetual instability in Eastern Europe. For the powers that be, the war provides economic opportunities, allows political leaders to consolidate power, and serves as a distraction from domestic issues. Power players, a unified elite. A true Machiavellian analysis would recognize that figures such as Putin, Biden, Trump, Macron, Netanyahu, and Xi Jinping, though seemingly adversaries, are all engaged in the same Machiavellian game. While they may act as though they are at odds, at the highest levels, their interests align with the perpetuation of power structures that benefit the global elite. Machiavelli argued that rulers should not be constrained by conventional morality but should act in whatever manner necessary to achieve their goals. This cabal of world leaders is simply following this dictum, preserving their power and enriching themselves through the manipulation of public perception and the creation of external threats. Take, for example, the Cold War, a classic case of this Machiavellian dynamic. On the surface, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in an ideological struggle between democracy and communism. But behind the scenes, the Cold War also served as a means to consolidate internal power for both superpowers. For the U.S., the fear of communism justified McCarthyism, expansive military spending, and global interventionism. For the Soviet Union, it served as an excuse to suppress dissent and centralize power in the hands of the Communist Party. Both sides played their parts in a global drama, while the real game was one of maintaining and expanding control. The business of war. Perhaps nowhere is the influence of a Machiavellian elite more evident than in the business of war. Machiavelli believed that war was an essential tool for a ruler, both as a means of expansion and as a way of maintaining internal stability. The modern military-industrial complex exemplifies this principle on a global scale. Wars, both real and potential, drive massive profits for defense contractors and the economies tied to them. But more importantly, They provide a means for governments to rally public support, suppress dissent, and extend their influence. The endless conflicts in the Middle East, the ongoing tension between China and the West over Taiwan, and the standoff in Ukraine all serve to keep the war machine well-oiled. For those at the top, these wars are not existential battles for survival but carefully managed engagements designed to ensure their grip on power remains unchallenged. If we look at history, from the Crusades to the Wars of Napoleon, conflicts have often been tools of political manipulation rather than purely ideological or territorial disputes. The same is true today, only with more sophisticated propaganda and weapons. The power of words, controlling the narrative. In The Prince, Machiavelli often emphasized the importance of controlling perception and manipulating the masses. This is evident in the way today's conflicts and threats are presented. The media, controlled by the very same elites benefiting from these conflicts, plays a key role in shaping public opinion. Consider the analysts who hype up every new terrorist threat or portray global leaders as noble warriors for freedom or dangerous tyrants. This constant stream of rhetoric is what Machiavelli would call parole, encore de paroles, empty words designed to distract and manipulate. Just as Machiavelli advised rulers to use cruelty wisely, today's elites use fear, of terrorism, of foreign powers, of chaos, as a tool to justify their actions and secure their rule. The public, lulled by a constant barrage of threats and promises, fails to see the true motivations behind the scenes. And so, the game continues, with the masses buying into the narratives spun by their leaders, all the while unaware of the Machiavellian calculations at play. Conclusion. From a Machiavellian perspective, the world stage is less a battlefield of conflicting ideologies and more a carefully constructed theater where enemies are manufactured, wars are staged, and leaders play predetermined roles. The Cabal, whether it exists as a formal entity or not, represents the consolidation of power by a global elite that understands the timeless Machiavellian truth. Power is not gained by being moral, but by controlling perception, manipulating enemies, and ensuring that conflict never truly ends. The real game is not the one that plays out in battlefields, but in backrooms and boardrooms, where deals are made, and wars are planned long before the first shot is fired. Just as Machiavelli advised, today's leaders understand that the public must be kept distracted, entertained, and above all, fearful, so that the real power brokers can continue their game unchecked.